Before we answer this question, a brief recap. In the current context of April 2026, President Donald Trump finds himself in a pincer maneuver between his own military successes and a domestic environment that is rapidly turning against the conflict. While he remains publicly defiant, several concrete factors are forcing his hand toward a ceasefire or a negotiated exit. Current status: the conflict. U.S. and Israeli air campaigns have successfully degraded over 60% of Iran's known nuclear infrastructure, including yesterday's strike near Bushehr, and roughly 40% of its ballistic missile capabilities. The Strait of Hormuz, effectively closed to non-aligned shipping. Oil prices have surged past $160 per barrel, triggering global economic instability. Internal Iran. Following the ascension of Mojtaba Khamenei as Supreme Leader on March 8th, the regime has maintained a resist-at-all-costs stance, though widespread protests over failing infrastructure and food shortages are stretching the IRGC thin. In this situation, let's ask ourselves whether Donald Trump is doing more harm than good in the long term for the United States. This is a genuinely contested question, and reasonable people disagree. Trump and his supporters argue the Iran war will ultimately make America safer and stronger. But a growing body of analysis, including from nonpartisan think tanks and foreign policy experts, identifies several serious long-term costs. The question of whether Donald Trump's second term is doing more harm than good is the central debate of 2026. While the White House points to a 4.3% GDP growth in late 2025 and aggressive border enforcement as wins, critics and long-term strategists argue that the structural costs to the United States are reaching a breaking point. The argument that he is causing long-term harm generally falls into four critical categories. 1. Economic sugar highs versus structural debt. Critics argue the current economic boom is built on sand. The debt bomb, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, OBBBA, has added an estimated $4.2 trillion to the national debt in just over a year. Analysts fear this is unsustainable, especially as interest rates remain elevated to combat tariff-induced inflation. The tariff trap. While the Liberation Day tariffs, which hit 28% this month, were meant to bring manufacturing home, they have instead increased the average household's cost of living by roughly $1,700 a year. The long-term risk is de-dollarization, as nations like China and Brazil increasingly bypass the US dollar to avoid American trade leverage. One of the most significant shifts in this term has been the aggressive use of Schedule F, which reclassified thousands of career civil servants as political appointees. The loyalty over competence. Risk. By gutting the State Department and intelligence agencies of nonpartisan experts, the administration has arguably weakened the institutional memory required to manage complex crises, like the current war with Iran, judicial stress, frequent attacks on activist judges who rule against the administration have further polarized the public's trust in the rule of law, creating a vacuum where truth is defined by political alignment rather than evidence. The America First foreign policy has moved from skepticism of alliances to what some call predatory transactionalism. The Iran fallout. While the military strikes have been tactically successful, the lack of a broad international coalition has left the U.S. shouldering 100% of the cost and 100% of the diplomatic blame. Vacuum for adversaries. By withdrawing from the WHO and scaling back NATO commitments, the U.S. has left a power vacuum that China and Russia are filling with their own security and trade frameworks, like the expanded BRICS Plus, social cohesion, and permacrisis. Perhaps the most intangible harm cited by critics is the state of the American psyche. The polarization loop. The administration's rhetoric often frames domestic political opponents as the enemy within. This has made bipartisan solutions to long-term problems, like Social Security insolvency or climate resilience, virtually impossible. Normalized instability. The frequency of high-stakes deadlines, like the April 6th Hormuz ultimatum, keeps the country in a state of constant anxiety, which some economists argue suppresses long-term private investment in favor of short-term speculation, shattering the alliance system built over 80 years. This may be the most consequential long-term damage. The Iran war has caused a deeper fracture in the transatlantic alliance, underscoring the need for European allies to invest more in their own militaries, with the understanding that America's post-World War II security umbrella has become unreliable. Trump rebuked NATO allies, calling their refusal to join the war a very foolish mistake, and in the same statement renounced U.S. allies in the Indo-Pacific, Japan, South Korea, and Australia, for also refusing to participate, declaring that the United States does not need the help of anyone. The transatlantic relationship emerges weaker from this war. So too does Washington's ability to portray itself as the leader of a system whose rules it is actively trashing. 6. Economic self-sabotage. Trump won the 2024 election largely on economic grievances. The war is now undermining that same foundation. One of the major reasons Trump won in 2024 was that Biden's presidency had been derailed by a cost-of-living crisis. White House aides and cabinet officials came under intense pressure to reverse the spike in energy prices caused by the start of the war. By destabilizing global energy markets, straining U.S. alliances, and exposing the limits of American coercive power, Tehran has ensured that even a tactically successful campaign carries significant strategic liabilities for Washington. Trump launched the war without congressional authorization and at no point laid out a clear exit strategy, barring the unlikely prospect of complete Iranian capitulation. Arab and European officials said they hadn't detected what Trump's endgame looks like, or if it even exists. Lawmakers similarly professed little understanding of how Trump will know he has achieved all his goals, or whether he has a plan for what comes afterward. Trump's approval rating has fallen to 35%, with just 31% approving of his handling of the economy. Roughly two-thirds of Americans say his policies are contributing to worsening economic conditions. These numbers create a weakened presidency heading into midterms. The harm argument isn't necessarily about today's stock market numbers. It's about the durability of the American system. Critics believe that by winning the immediate battles, the Iran war, trade disputes, and border control, through sheer force of will, the administration is breaking the very institutions and alliances that allowed the U.S. to lead the world for the last 80 years. History suggests that wars launched without clear endgames, without allied support, and against the will of the domestic public tend to leave the initiating country weaker, not stronger, regardless of battlefield outcomes. Whether this war breaks that pattern remains to be seen. Why Trump is under pressure to end the war. Donald Trump is not being forced to end the war with Iran in any involuntary or externally compelled sense. As of April 4, 2026, roughly day 36 of the conflict, he has repeatedly signaled that U.S. operations could wrap up in 2 to 3 weeks, or very soon, shortly, framing it as a deliberate choice once core objectives are met. In his recent primetime address and public statements, Trump has emphasized that the U.S. is on the cusp of success, with Iran's nuclear program set back for 15-20 years, its Navy, Dart Air Force, missile production largely destroyed, leadership decapitated, including former Supreme Leader Khamenei, and the country decimated militarily and economically. He has said the U.S. will finish the job with intense strikes in the coming weeks, but then leave without needing a formal deal from Iran. With the 2026 midterm elections approaching, Republican incumbents are sounding the alarm. Recent polling from March shows that 60% of Americans believe the military action has gone too far, and roughly half of Republican voters are strongly opposed to a ground invasion. The risk. If Trump doesn't wind down the kinetic phase soon, he risks losing both the House and Senate, which would effectively lame duck the rest of his second term. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz has pushed global oil prices past $160 per barrel. This has triggered gas price spikes. domestic gas prices have reached levels that are neutralizing the Trump economy gains of 2025. Gas prices surged past $4 per gallon, and stock markets tumbled to multi-year lows. About 45% of Americans say they are extremely or very concerned about being able to afford gas in the next few months, up from 30% shortly after Trump won re-election on promises to lower the cost of living. Market instability. Wall Street has been in a risk-off spiral since the strikes began on February 28th. Trump, who often views the stock market as a report card of his presidency, is under immense pressure from the donor class to stabilize the energy corridors. While the Senate GOP narrowly defeated the War Powers Resolution, 47-53, in early March, Trump is nearing a fiscal cliff. The Pentagon has already requested an additional $200 billion for Operation Epic Fury. Unlike the initial airstrikes, this new funding requires a fresh vote in Congress. With Democrats unified and anti-war Republicans, like the Massey Paul wing, holding the balance of power, Trump may not have the votes to continue a high-intensity campaign past May. Trump has already begun signaling that the war is very complete. His words from his Doral interview on March 30th, military success. With over 60% of Iran's nuclear infrastructure and a majority of its navy destroyed, the Pentagon's primary objectives, denying a nuclear breakout and degrading the IRGC's reach, have been largely achieved. From a strategic standpoint, there is little left to bomb from the air without moving to a ground war, which Trump has consistently stated he wants to avoid. While the U.S.-Israeli coalition is militarily dominant, it is diplomatically isolated. Allied fatigue. The UK and France have already called for a return to diplomacy to prevent a total regional meltdown. Chinese mediation. China, desperate to restore oil flow through the strait, is reportedly pressuring Tehran to accept a neutrality deal. For Trump, beating China to a peace deal is a significant ego and geopolitical motivator. The war is deeply unpopular at home. Trump's pollster Tony Fabrizio conducted surveys showing the war was growing increasingly unpopular. White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles warned Trump that aides were giving him a rose-colored view and urged colleagues to be more forthright with the boss about the political and economic risks. About 59% of Americans say the military action in Iran has been excessive. Wiles told Trump the longer the war dragged on, the more it would threaten his public support and Republicans' prospects in November's midterm elections. For Trump, the stark warning was described as unsettling. Key Trump officials, including Defense Secretary Hegseth, were surprised by the barrage of retaliatory attacks Tehran launched against U.S. and Israeli targets, including in countries long assumed to be off-limits: Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar. This suggests the war's costs were underestimated from the start. Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz has turned the war into an international economic emergency. Leaders of 40 countries met virtually to discuss the crisis, but failed to agree on any concrete steps. British Foreign Secretary Cooper accused Iran of holding the global economy hostage, and traffic through the strait dropped from 150 vessels per day to just 10 to 20. The pressure from allies to resolve this is immense. Emerging from briefings with senior administration officials, lawmakers professed little understanding of how Trump will know that he has achieved all his goals in Iran, or whether he has a plan for what comes afterward. Arab and European officials also said they hadn't detected what Trump's endgame looks like, or if it even exists. Lawmakers similarly professed little understanding of how Trump will know he has achieved all his goals, or whether he has a plan for what comes afterward. Donald Trump faces strong pressure to end the war with Iran because of rising domestic political costs, a sharp economic shock, especially to energy markets, growing public and elite opposition, and intense diplomatic pressure from allies who fear regional escalation. These forces make a prolonged campaign politically and economically unsustainable for his administration and for allied partners. He is not forced, but he is constrained by politics. polls, elections, economics, oil, inflation, military limits, no quick win, international pressure, allies, strategic risks, war dragging on. Trump isn't being forced by a single law or person, but by a collision of realities. He has reached the limits of what air power can achieve without a ground war. He is running out of unauthorized money, and his own party's survival in November depends on gas prices falling. If you liked our material, I urge you to give us a like and subscribe. In the future, we plan to do more analyses of the global geopolitical situation, a situation that impacts us all. Until next time, all the best.